The Cumbria Way, 74 miles from Ulverston to Carlisle in 5 days in August 2019. At the end of August 2019, my son Alex and I, Acre, the Longstow Express, embarked on another mum and son adventure on a sneaky, extra late summer walk which took us right through the very heart of one of our favourite parts of the country, the Lake District. We walked an average of 20 miles per day for 5 days, from Ulverston in the south to Carlisle in the north, through the most beautiful landscape, in sun, wind, thick mist, torrential rain and floods. The guidebook says that this is one of Britain's prettiest and easiest long-distance walks, along undulating paths which wend their way past memorable lakes, low mountain tarns, high mountains, dramatic dales and picturesque lakes, woodlands, waterfalls and villages with delightful country pubs and cottages. We can never visit the Lake District enough. There is something very special about the gentle, quintessentially English vibe which pervades the fells and valleys of what to me feels like the very heart of England. The fact that it is so popular with tourists, poets, writers, artists and visionaries and attracts vast numbers of visitors each year serves as testimony to the fact that the Lake District has something exceptional that people want to tap into. It has a gentle, vibrant type of energy which I have only ever experienced in a few special places. I have never experienced this distinctive energy anywhere outside the British Isles. I do believe that the British Isles are unique in this respect, and that the energy which pervades the very fabric of our nation is less veiled in certain places, and that the Lake District is one of these. It is almost as though the veil which separates the worlds is thinner there. When people climb a mountain, they often say that it makes them feel closer to heaven, which I believe is just another synonym for the astral plane or the invisible dimensions which surround us. There is a hidden light in the British Isles which is always there if we can only tune into it, and it is this light which powers our very existence on the planet. It is like we and the planet are mutually dependent on one another, drawing sustenance from each other and feeding it back. I have always felt that megalithic sites, and stone circles in particular, are rather like energy transformers and booster stations on a sort of energy grid which encircles the planet. Walking the ancient tracks helps us to tune into these energies, and at the same time it helps to maintain them. This is what I was born to do. I do believe that our planet has huge regenerative properties if left to its own devices, and that any devastation caused by human beings merely scratches the surface of a system which is perfectly capable of rejuvenation in the greater scheme of things. This does not mean to say that we have license to pollute our beautiful planet and act like environmental thugs. Quite the contrary. We should all strive to prevent environmental harm and to individually do our best to live in harmony with nature. But it is presumptuous to think that anything we do can permanently disrupt the divine structure of our earthly home. Obviously, the planet's energies will react, often in surprising and dramatic ways, to negative and often horrendous environmental threats. But because of the duality of nature, these are being balanced out by the fact that there are many people who are working, either consciously or unconsciously, in the wings to counterbalance the consequences of these. Nature will bounce back, no matter what we do, and consequently, I believe that our future is bright. Our footpaths and national trails are now teeming with walkers and adventurers who derive huge pleasure from their activities. This is a relatively new pursuit, which became increasingly popular during the last century. The idea of walking through the countryside or climbing mountains for pleasure developed in the 18th century and arose because of changing attitudes to the landscape and nature with the rise of the Romantic movement. Today it is one of Britain's most popular leisure activities. I have visited the Lake District on numerous occasions during my life, and each time has felt like a sort of coming home. The first time was in 1972, when I was 19 years old. I hitchhiked there from London with my boyfriend at the time. On the first evening, it rained heavily, and we woke up in the middle of the night in a pool of water inside our pathetic excuse for a tent. We then spent the rest of the night sheltering from the rain in the public toilets on the campsite. After that, we ditched the tent and spent the next 2 weeks walking wherever our feet took us and sleeping rough, under hedges, in straw stacks and barns, wherever we could find shelter for the night. It was a wonderfully liberating experience. I can't remember exactly where we walked, but I do remember climbing Helvellyn. Striding Edge was so scary that I crawled along it. We also climbed Skiddaw and visited the Castle Rigg Stone Circle. These all made a huge, lasting impression on me. Back in those days, Castle Rigg was not inundated by hordes of tourists as it is today, and we had the site to ourselves. It was completely magical. I will never forget the beauty I experienced that day as I stood in the middle of the circle of stones, surrounded by a backdrop of some of the most fantastic scenery on the planet. On a subsequent visit with my son in 2010, I am proud to say that I managed to walk upright along Striding Edge, but I rather lost my nerve on the final ascent. I remember clinging desperately to the mountainside, frozen in fear, unable to move either up or down, until I heard a scrambling noise below me and saw another climber coming up fast. Well, there's nothing like a bit of competition to galvanize me, and I was damned if I was going to let them overtake me, so my fear took wings and I shot up the final section at the speed of light. Ulverston. Here we are at the official start of our walk in Ulverston. The Sir John Barrow Monument on top of Hode Hill. This is almost a compulsory warm-up for anyone walking the Cumbria Way when you arrive in Ulverston the evening before starting the walk. A taste of what we had ahead of us. On the top of Hode Hill and looking towards the mountains of the Lake District in the far distance. Amazing to think that by the end of the next day we would have walked into those mountains and beyond. Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy was born in Ulverston in 1890, hence this statue outside Coronation Hall. An aptly named flower shop in Ulverston. A charming Ulverston bench, a recurrent theme in the town. Day 1, Ulverston to Coniston, 19 miles. En route to Coniston. Lunch break at Beacon Tarn. Waterfall at Sunny Bank, just before the trail reaches Coniston Water. Hurdies. Coniston Water. Day 2, Coniston to Dungeon Gill in Great Langdale, 16 miles, and a day of torrential rain. It rained solidly all day, but we still loved it. and our wonderful rain gear. Snug and dry in my impermeable rain gear. Tarn House. Colwith Force in full spate. People told us that August had been unusually wet in Cumbria. Colwith Force. And again Colwith Force. We had to divert off the trail to reach it, but it was well worth the extra miles. Flooding in Great Langdale Beck. The path was knee-deep in water between Skelwith Bridge and Elterwater. Alex lost his mobile after we scaled a few fences and diverted into a boggy field to try and avoid the flooding. And we then spent 3 desperate, cold, wet, exhausting hours thrashing around in a field and floods trying to find it. After giving up, we then met a couple further down the trail who told us that they had found it and handed it in to the pub in Elterwater. They were like angels sent from heaven. Cute hurdy lamb. And no, I did not Photoshop this photo. This was on our approach to Old Dungeon Gill Hotel, where we stayed the night. Day 3, Dungeon Gill to Keswick, 21 miles. After a day of thick mist, the sun finally broke through in the late afternoon as we approached Keswick. This was a particularly nostalgic day for me because the Cumbria Way crosses Wainwright's coast-to-coast path at Stonethwaite. It was amazing to remember that my sister and I had crossed there 10 years previously on my very first long-distance walk. Heading up Great Langdale and Mickleden towards Stake Pass. Mickleden, with a rowan tree in the foreground. Both the bark and berries have astringent properties, and rowan has many uses as a herbal medicine, including in the treatment of sore throats and diarrhea. Magically, it has powerful protection properties and is one of the traditional 9 types of wood burnt on the Beltane fires. Mickleden and preparing for a steep climb. At the top of Stake Pass and just starting the descent into Langstrath. Heading down towards Langstrath, the longest uninhabited valley in the Lake District. This was one of the highlights of our walk. It was so unimaginably wild and beautiful there. The River Derwent. The entrust sculpture on the shore of Derwent Water, which commemorates the centenary of the first purchase of land made by the National Trust. Derwent Water. View across to Skiddaw as we approach Keswick. Day 4, Keswick to Culbeck, 19.5 miles. We decided to take the eastern route, which crosses the fells to Culbeck. Here you can see Skiddaw in the background on the far left, and the long queue of walkers heading up towards it. Crossing Whit Beck, en route to High Pike. Last look back at the Lake District. En route to High Pike along the River Culdew. En route to High Pike. Slogging our way up Great Lingy Hill along Grainskill Beck. Grainskill Beck in 30 degrees heat. I almost passed out here after making a serious mistake. In other words, failing to eat enough before I started this exhausting climb. Eating our lunch at the Lingy hut solved the problem, but it was a close thing. View from the Lingy hut at the top of our climb. The Lingy hut, an outpost in the wilderness. Alex enjoying the view at the top of High Pike with Blencathra in the background. High Pike Superman. The High Pike Splat. An entertaining poster called Tubular Fells at our B&B in Culdbeck. Day 5. Culdbeck to Carlisle, 17.5 miles. Leaving Culdbeck in 30-degree heat. A parasol mushroom. These are edible and delicious. Carlisle Castle. Triumphant finish outside the tourist office in the centre of Carlisle. Lessons learnt. Check to make sure your mobile phone hasn't fallen out of your pocket after climbing a fence. Make sure you have enough fuel on board before starting a steep climb. Herdies are a lakeland icon.